Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scotty Kirkland, and I'm the Exhibits, Publications, and Programs Coordinator here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. We're excited to welcome you today to the second installment of our 2021 Food for Thought series. Before I introduce our speaker, I have just a few announcements. On Monday, February 22nd at noon Central, the Archives will present another installment of a new series called the Research Rundown. This is an occasional series hosted by our reference room staff on historical and genealogical tools and how-tos. Monday's session will discuss African American research using city directories and will be led by archivist Carly Ann Burkett. You can catch the research rundown right here virtually on Monday at noon. No registration or advance notice is required. And if you're unable to watch the program live, you can find it later on the Archives YouTube page with hundreds of other of our programs. On Tuesday, March 9th, the Archives will host a book talk with Dr. David Alsobrook, who will discuss his new memoir, Presidential Archivist. It details his 30-year career in public service, which included stints at the presidential libraries of Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. Dr. Alsobrook's career began right here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History, so this is a homecoming in a way. The presentation will begin virtually at noon Central Time on March the 9th. Finally, be sure to mark your calendars for March 18th, which will be our next installment of Food for Thought. We will feature historian Brianna Royster, who will be talking about an African-American suffragist from Birmingham named Indiana Little. The program will stream online here beginning at noon. Our speaker today is Dr. Hilary Green, Associate Professor of History in the Department of Gender and Race Studies at the University of Alabama. For this academic year, she is also serving as the Vann Professor of Ethics and Society at Davidson College in North Carolina. She's the author of Educational Reconstruction, African American Schools in the Urban South, and numerous other articles, book chapters, and scholarly publications. You can purchase a copy of Dr. Green's book from Alabama Original, the Archives Online Museum store, and we'll post the link in the comments section in just a moment. Dr. Green's topic today is one very close to her heart, the Hallowed Grounds Project, which she began at the University of Alabama in January of 2015 to explore enslaved experiences, memory, and the legacies of slavery on the campus of the university. Dr. Green, welcome to Food for Thought.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for everyone in attendance. And one of the things I like about the Alabama Department of Archives and History, the archivists and the research materials were instrumental as I worked on the dissertation that led to the book Educational Reconstruction, and also continuing the relationship with the digitized collections in my classes. So for me, coming back to Montgomery, even if it's virtually, is a treat. So my research began because of a student. But Dr. Green, slavery did not exist here. This student comment in the form of a question really helped to launch what I call now the Hallowed Grounds Project. It convinced me and really quickly reminded me the power of myths and the power of not seeing the built landscape in which enslaved people labored at the University of Alabama. And those who survived slavery, African Americans who continued to labor on the campus, oftentimes in the background, oftentimes unknown and unnamed to the general population, but yet laboring and doing work. And this student comment really not only shocked me, and as an educator, there's very little things that shock me at this moment when students say them, because I've heard a wide variety of things. It shocked me in a way because in the previous year, almost a year to the date, when I was on my on-campus interview, applying for the job for the University of Alabama, that I was on a walk-in tour with my soon-to-be department chair, Youth McKnight. And it was a historical marker that I will talk about at the end of the presentation for the Little Round House, and the phrase rented slaves on it. that convinced me that the University of Alabama would be a place for me as a Black woman who studies the 19th century U.S. South and Civil War memory more broadly. And that the campus had changed because of new markers and new narratives being told. So when that student made that response, I had done some preliminary work because I was just curious. And I was able to pull up through the university libraries some of the digitized slave receipts that were there. And I turned it into a teachable moment, but I also turned it into a moment that it will be in future classes. And that's when I turned to the archives, because I knew that student never read that marker. That student never saw the successes, didn't see what the buildings behind the president's mansion, didn't see the other sites of slavery. And as an African American male in my class, I was very cognizant to make sure that he and others who came in knew this. So I turned to doing a tour. And the reason why I chose a tour was because I understood some of the work at UNC Chapel Hill, where I received my PhD, at the Black and Blue Tour, alternate campus space to get people to force to see the art, the landscape, to see the other history that's hidden in plain view. But this decision to do the tour as a part of my courses in terms of the archives made me confront some of the literature that I took for granted, including W. Fitzhugh Brundage's quote here about the Southern Past, which is very, in this particular chapter, about archives and the Alabama Department of Archives and History in particular, and other Southern archives, and how the architecture of remembrance and archivalness was intentional. And these silences sometimes were built in. And this collective forgetting was a part of this process at the turn of the 20th century. And I had to push against that to try to recover the names and the experiences of enslaved people. But this quote about the archival impulse became no longer something I read in a book or I taught to my students in my memory classes. It became my everyday life. And how to deal with these silences, these erasures, these collective forgetting, the myths that were told, and the myths that were promoted in history, but also silenced in history, and the myth of absence that was created in the wake. And in doing this tour, I became reminded of the work done by slavery scholars like Melissa Fuentes, Vincent Brown, and others who have been doing their work as acts of recovery. And I've also turned to the work of digital humanities scholars, in particular Tara McPherson, Moya Bailey, Jessica Marie Johnson, and figuring out creative means to tell this history. But in their work, it forced me also, as an untenured faculty member when I started this project, to be bold, to be brave, and do this work of recovery. And I did this work of recovery on top of my normal tenure and promotion requirements, on top of my teaching service requirements, because of a student. And that student who got me out of my comfort zone, and that student and subsequent students who convinced me that I need to go into the archive. So I did what was normal. I went to Hull Library, W.S. Hull, and I started to go through the records that were there of slavery. So the first set of records I went through were the digitized slave receipts themselves through the UA Digital Library collections. And then I went to the physical boxes of Record Group 1 and found additional names. And as I was going through each folder, I was finding names, I was entering them into a spreadsheet and doing that work. But in my collection methods, I made sure that the enslaved people were the first column of that Excel spreadsheet. And I would recognize their name, but also their humanity. And I was going through these records, I started to see names that appeared over and over and over again. William, who was a carpenter, enslaved by a faculty member and his wife. And when Horace Pratt dies, his widow, Isabel Pratt, continues renting out William to the university until her death in 1864. And his handiwork in the Maxwell Hall became apparent, but also the other work that we still have on the campus. He was Carpenter William, Jack, Sam, Moses, Arthur, but unknown. Unknown boys, unknown men, unknown, those whose names were not even recorded. Unknown became their name. And doing this, I got to get a sense of where they labored, who they were, what kind of work they did, whether it was toting wood, carrying water, or also too cutting the lawn of the current quad in that quadscape there, trimming trees. Also the abuses that they suffered at the hands of students, the ways faculty members in the faculty minutes that survived. We have the first 4 volumes of the faculty minutes, so going from the 1831 in the first meeting up into the mid 1850s. Regulations around them, but also how faculty employed their labor and put it in their minutes. I also started thinking about the spaces in which survived: the guardhouse, the president's mansion, and the quarters behind it, and thinking about who labored in those spaces. And in Manley's diaries, Lydia, Mary, Sabra, and their work in what was the kitchens, but also in the president's mansion came to being, as well as the children that they bore. So using those spaces, using these voices, and knowing quite quickly that I had enough to do a tour. So I built this tour that could be designed for a class period. So I teach Tuesdays and Thursdays, so a 75-minute classroom period in which we would start at the Guardhouse house and end at the cemetery on campus where the slavery apology marker. The site was, the various sites on this tour were contingent on what is possible in that time period, how much information can be presented to the students without being overloaded. And before we go on this physical walk-in tour in the heat, because we always do it in August and sometimes in March, how that can use the weather, the rain, the heat to also build empathy for the labor of these enslaved people. And that decision means on this tour, we start at the Guardhouse house. We go to the guardhouse, little roundhouse. We go to the mound. Then we go to the front of the president's mansion on the side of Denny Chun's. And then we walk over to in front of Smith Hall, and right in that little area to talk about memory and the changes after the Civil War to the campus and those individuals who survived and what they did in Tuscaloosa. And we end at the apology marker. And for each site, participants learn and say the names of the enslaved people that we do know connected to those places. And they get a new way to see the campus and take that learning outside the classroom, but to walk in these landscapes that the students had previously ignored. So the built landscape and what survived from slavery matters. And I'm going to take some time here to talk about this building, because this is the building that really captured my attention when I was on my campus tour. And this is the second site on the Hallowed Grounds tour. This is the little roundhouse guardhouse and the historical marker that has rented slaves on it. And it's this physical space, but also what's now next to it, allowed to talk about how this site had such a rich, complex history that even the marker doesn't really capture. And yet students will learn and participants will learn the 3 names of the drummers of Neil, Crawford, and Gabe. And here, that marker is important. That guardhouse that was constructed during the early 1860s, the little round house provided shelter from inclement weather for cadets on sentry duty. Until 1865, it also housed the University Drum Corps, which was composed of rented slaves. One of the few buildings not destroyed by Union forces when the campus was burned in 1865. And it's in this little sentence or two here that really captured and using students and participants to learn about the slave past, but also how it has changed. because those drummers in my research was easy to find. Because in Garland's papers and the transcriptions of them is the survived enslaved past of the bearers. Also, too, the first presence of the drummers as early as December of 1860, because they are housed in a boarding house off campus with other students and two other enslaved attendants. They are also listed in the surviving quartermaster report for during the Civil War. And in that volume, instead of like other enslaved people who are hired out and impressed through the school at the time, the drummers are paid through a separate music fund. And seeing their presence, but also their uniqueness and how they were positioned on the campus. Because these drummers, owned by the Watsons, were able to go visit family with their surviving past. Gabe and Neil, who owns Mrs. Watson, who the university deals with, she's the one negotiating their hiring rates. She's the one who's negotiating the terms that they can go home. I knew that Gabe and Neil were the first two drummers and that they had family in Montgomery and in Mobile. And this pass that allowed them to go during a break to see family set them apart from the other people who were enslaved during the war years. And then also, too, Mrs. Watson was a shrewd negotiator. When President Garland attempted to purchase the two drummers, she not only refused that purchase offer, but also upped the rates for her rental of them to the university. And as you can see here, Garland complies because of the skills that these drummers had, but also the relationship they had with Mrs. Watson, the Watson family. So what happens, Neil and Gabe are the first, but shortly in 1863, early 1864, we see Crawford come in. And he will come in and he replaces Neil. So it'll be Gabe and Crawford who are there on the steps, issuing out the low song drum roll when the university knows that federal forces are coming and approaching campus, and leads to the evacuation and subsequent destruction of the campus. In these passes, though, that survive in these accounts, these are some of the last records we have of the drummers, because when they leave, they disappear. And as much as I would like to hope and find them after slavery by checking the records around Alabama, so in towards the Selma area where they're also Mobile and Montgomery, sadly, we can't find them. So the likelihood that these drummers probably did not survive the Civil War. And that doesn't mean that their work and their remembrance didn't matter. But what surprised me by the ease of finding their names made me think about their silences on the marker of rented slaves when there's 3. But also, too, how the university had subsequently remembered and disremembered these 3 individuals. And this is where yearbooks and the process of the student newspapers allowed me to look at the collective forgetting that quickly envelops, but also how this particular building, this site, gets remembered. And in 1912 yearbook here, you see a really good image of the guardhouse, and you notice there's no library next to it. But yet, even here, there's some silences. This was not the only building that survived the Civil War. It's one of several. But there's already a narrative building that erases and remembers at the same time. But also, too, the weaponization of that site and that memory and that erasure comes clear in the 1961 yearbook. And this site of slavery, a wartime cabin for the Drum Corps, is a site of resistance to desegregation. And at the second site that the tour participants learned about this history too. 5 years after a mob successfully kicked off Authoring Lucy from the campus, and this is the 65th anniversary of that event this year, this is on the yearbook. And not only is this image on the yearbook, it's imprinted throughout the yearbook. So every section break has an imprint of the Guardhouse with the section on it. So the faculty, you'll have the parade of faculty in the regalia superimposed over the site. And in the dedication, students remembered this site, but also too the Civil War in a very particular way, as they too will remember the fight of students and their ancestors against the desegregation of the campus. Like the Civil War and federal imposition in their minds, they were dedicating their time to fight the integration of the school. And not only would they fight, they saw it committed to be dedicated to that fight. And in that dedication, you see images like this. This is campus life section of the yearbook, where you literally have a Pamela cheerleader jumping for joy on the site of a slave cabin. And it's this complex history, from slavery, the Civil War, to its uses, to now a site of transformation, a site of reconciliation of that old past, marked with a historical marker. And during football season, Roll Tide, no more tailgating here. But yet there's no official recognition of Neil, Crawford, and Gabe, and a possibility of adding their names to it. But the complexity of the site is some of the complexity that people on the tour get. And it's the complexity of making this history known. So when I do tours now, the Hallowed Grounds tours that started, the first one started during summer school of 2015. There was the dry test run. I tweaked it. That August was the first set of tours. From that August date to right before COVID hit, this is one of the last pictures before COVID. This is the end of February of last year. I've reached almost 5,000 people in person, so I'm slightly under 5,000. It has been expanded to a digital version. This is a Google map version, but there's also an Adobe Spark one. So students you see on their phones doing the tour. But they're also learning the information and also seeing some of those documents with a bibliography so they can do additional research. But the tours remain the central feature of it. And the names of the enslaved people get now attached and new attachments to these surviving sites. So where we are standing at the type of the mounds, I get to talk about what enslaved people did in dormitories. In this case, what Arthur did as a long-term enslaved attendant that labored in the dormitories of Alabama before the Civil War. And also the role of William, the carpenter, who did repairs around that building and other buildings there. But we get to have different types of conversations about the archival record by physically walking the campus. And as you can see in the image, it's kind of hard. It's a diverse group of people. It's faculty, it's staff, it's students, of undergrad and grad students, it's alumni, it's community members. And it's a shared conversation about this history and talking about the possibility of the campus in the present, but also moving forward. But also too, as you can see here, this is, it's incorporated into the campus, and I'm there in the corner in some shorts because it was 108 degrees with the heat index this day when we were walking the campus, and we are at the end of the tour. This is a group of RAs at the University of Alabama. We just talked about the apology marker, but you can see the groups of people who are here, who are learning this past and talking about memory and changing those conversations that once weren't present when I was there, and making history come alive. But in the process of this is where me being a Reconstruction era scholar and my knowledge of Alabama history and my knowledge of Reconstruction in Alabama, a part of my research always has been what happened after the Civil War. What happened to the former enslaved people who survived slavery? Where did they go? What did they do? And how did they build the Black Tuscaloosa experience? And in that process and work, I discovered Jeremiah Barnes. Jeremiah Barnes is the gentleman in the middle of all the white hair there. On the side, the other gentleman is his son, Benjamin Barnes. Jeremiah Barnes was enslaved by Judge Washington Moody. He was the playmate of Frank Moody. And he is a pioneer in Black education in Tuscaloosa. Because of segregation in terms of the University of Alabama not allowing Black students to attend the university, Jeremiah Barnes educated all 5 of his children at Tuskegee University. So Benjamin, his eldest, was the first to graduate, but all 5 of his children attended. Only the boys, 4, graduated. His daughter drops out because she gets married her last year. But the Barnes family is unique here because they were tied to Black education. So when Booker T. Washington comes to speak in Tuscaloosa, he does so because Jeremiah Barnes invites him because of his connections through his children to the school. And at First African Baptist Church, it is President Abercrombie who is the invited guest of Barnes and the Black community to hear Booker T. Washington speak. And with my colleagues this spring, we are going to recreate this performance by hearing and having a recreation of Booker T. Washington's words, but also to some of the songs performed. And it's in locating Jeremiah Barnes and doing these tours that I have now have contact with the first descendant to reach out to me. And it's Candace Barnes, who's directly tied through Benjamin. And it's because of the Hallowed Grounds tour, because of the documents online, and because of my publications, because of that student comment, that Candace Barnes learned more about Jeremiah, but also Barnes and their proud legacy that is still at the university, but also in the community. And she was able to uncover more about her ancestor, those ties, but also the pride that she has as an educator herself, learning that she came from this legacy of education despite the slave past. So doing this work has allowed for descendants and people of the Black community who are also the living descendants of the campus history that have also have newer conversations and the impact going forward. So doing this work because of a student and a comment, but archival, changing the way people have seen, has allowed for Candace Barnes and others to learn more about their history and the achievements that they made both on the campus, but also in the surrounding Tuscaloosa community. And these other parts of the legacy that are made possible because of this work. So I want to thank you for paying attention and talking about this project. It's going to continue to grow. I will continue to do tours, but once I get back from sabbatical, I'm going to do less on tours and more on the digitization of the material so it can get into deeper hands and think about how to recreate this world that more people can enjoy and learn the history beyond the tour. But I welcome any questions that you have. Thank you for your patience and listening.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Green. We can tell you're passionate about this, and we could tell that even before you told us that you gave a tour when it was 108 degrees outside. That's important. That's really great. I want to start off with a couple of questions here, and then go ahead and remind our viewers, if you have a question for Dr. Green, please drop it in the comments now. We'll get to as many of those as we can. I want to ask you first about what the response has been to your project, both by students and alumni, and any other comments that you'd like to make on the responses that you've gotten. You've been working on this for over 5 years now.
Yeah, so it's been overwhelmingly positive. The students were the first, and it's because of the students that the tour has just grown, because they were in my class and we walked the campus. Next thing you know, I'm like, well, can my roommate come? And then I'm getting emails from other professors like, hey, your student was talking about this tour. This sounds really interesting. Can I do the tour too? So I started doing guest lectures. And now I have to restrict it to 6 guest lectures a semester because I still have other work to do. But it's a lot. And then Black History Month, I always make sure I have a tour for the community. Community members are there, and they're the ones who have been asking for, can you do this in the afternoon? Because I want to make sure my 8th grader can come, my 9th grader can come. So it was that overwhelming support from the students to faculty and staff to the community. In terms of alumni, I had gotten a lot of positive support from Black alumni, in particular, Black alumni who were football players, now NFL players, who some of them
Right.
coaches. And I get to not only get their responses, and I keep them in a folder just in case to remind myself of why I do this tour. But I get a lot of support from my brothers and my father and all my uncles who are like, you had this person contact me? Like, yes, I did. And they're saying, keep up the good work. So it has grown beyond my means because of the reception. And it's one of the reasons why the tours expanded beyond and forced me to do a lot more collaboration, a lot more ways to get documents online, and how to grow the project beyond just the tour itself because of the interest. And in terms of negative feedback, I've gotten little. And that's one thing that did surprise me, as I was expecting more pushback, but it is so little that I can count on one hand how many negative comments are directed towards me or emailed towards me. It has been overwhelmingly positive, and it's in that positivity and that engagement that has allowed for different kind of conversations, but also expansion of here's where the records are, here's the other thing, and more people engaging in this past. And that's one of the things that I am so grateful for. And I never would have thought about that when I first started this in January 2015.
That's great. We want to rack up a question now from Steph Smith, which relates to the community response. Is the tour ever available for non-University of Alabama students? Talk a little bit about that, and then remind everyone too that we're dropping the link for the Hallowed Grounds Project in the comment section, so you can check that out as well.
Yeah, so this is and this is Black History Month. This is one of the few things I do exclusively for Black History Month. I always try to have 4 tours, and I always have to have 4 public tours that community members can feel free to come in. And I advertise them so people can come. During the fall, because of the 4 in Black History Month, I got requests from the community members to do at least 1 or 2 during family weekend or alumni weekend, because that's time they can also feel like they can come to the campus easily and also on a weekend and not during a weekday. So for me, having those public tours and make sure that the community has opportunities allows for more engagement. And it's making sure that it's not just my students in the UA community. So I always advertise those on my website when they will occur. And so they will always be there. But if you can't come in person, these are where the digitized tours come in. The Adobe Spark one that incorporates the images and the like. I get a lot from homeschool parents throughout the state of Alabama and Tuscaloosa, but outside of the state in communities looking through. And I hear community members all the time saying, thank you so much. Do you have other documents? Where can I go? And other things. So they use the digitized tours, the content there, and then they ask more. So I hear stuff from 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders because of that. And that community focus has been key. So look for the website when I get back for when I'll have a tour, and I'll have a tour for sure in September or October of next year.
Great, terrific. We want to ask a question now from Pamela Foster. Pamela says, can you talk a little bit more about the apology marker you referenced in your talk a few times?
Yes. So the apology marker is one of those things where I think is key in this history of remembrance and disremembrance, because the University of Alabama was one of the early schools to apologize for slavery. And the putting up that marker with the work of Al Brophy, but other faculty at the university and others in 2004 was a major milestone. Within 2 years, the marker itself is put up. But then after that, what I call we put up a marker culture emerged that most people didn't know that it existed because it's over by the biology building and the transportation building. It's not on the public tour. It is out of people's views. So I made sure to always include that marker on the tour. It's the last thing to remind them, like, no, UA has done some things. And we need to celebrate this, but how do we not have this where it's silence that people don't know where it is? And when I first started doing the tours, 95 to 98% of the students did not know where that thing existed. And so to have that as part of the conversation, and those are the last names, William Boise Brown, as well as Jack Rudolph, that are included in the names that they learn. But the apology marker is one where you could see it has been resistance and pressure from the community to add something to the campus and to acknowledge the past, but also how a marker alone is not enough to continue those conversations. And even like the marker for the Guardhouse, most people don't see it. So how do you force people to see even these success stories plus the others? But the apology marker is something that's very important. And that cemetery and having it marked that way, and those enslaved people who were interred there, but also the others. Because right now, the way I could see the cemetery that's now a fragment, they're under concrete. So how do we acknowledge the ones who are not there, but under other buildings? But that marker alone was important too in the story of remembrance, from let's get away from this forgetting to add acknowledge. So how do we make it sustainable over time?
Sure. Let me ask you a related question to that before we go on to another viewer question. How do you think the renaming of buildings fits into the university's ongoing process of reckoning with its own history?
Yeah, so this is one of the interesting things for me. I know students hate those buildings, especially when they learn the name of it. It tells them that they don't matter, especially Morgan Hall, Knott Hall. Those are the buildings, especially my students are like, we have a building named after the person who called African American rats. Am I a rat? Am I this? Knott Hall. Am I that ongoing pain? So one of the things I always say is it causing someone pain? How do we do this in this trauma? And so one of the things I think I'm glad there are some buildings that have been renamed, but one of the things I think is an opportunity to tell the past. How do we use those 4 years? How do we use those welcome spaces to tell the full history from, yes, this used to be named after Josiah C. Knott. This is the history and the timeline of him. Put that in conversation with the African Americans from the from Mobile in particular, where Knott and the medical school was, the Reconstruction story of that space. And the last thing should be the decision to rename the building, should be the last of that timeline. And then have it where you can build the story afterwards. So for me, and I know for my students who wanted to leave the institution and transfer once they saw and learned and recognized those names, and also people in the community who will not step foot on campus because of those building names, because of who we've idolized in stone, maybe we can have some conversations about reconciliation. And this is where as a historian and doing this work, I think we can use more digital means, but also to those openings, those 4 years that can't be ignored, to tell the stories that are missing, including this story of removal.
Right. Great. Let's put a question up now from Dr. Hayden McDaniel, who's one of our education curators here. She says, thanks so much for the interesting talk. She says, you talked a bit about the influence your students had on this research. Can you give us another example of how what your students found in their research has helped shape your understanding of the story?
Yeah, so 2 quick examples. Arthur. Arthur was a name that kept on coming. I didn't think of anything of it because I'm doing database work and I'm not seeing the names.
Right.
When I go and I teach the tour, I take students to Hull. So they go through the folders and they're holding it and they were like, Arthur's here 15 times. And they're like, and they're tracking him. And I'm like, what's he doing? Like, why is he here? How is he here? And he's a long-term rental to the school. He's not owned by the school. So we're like, who Okay, who is an enslaver? What kind of work is he doing? What administrations is he working under? And it's because they do an assignment through the archival folder for their particular decade. Saw him in the 1830s, the 1840s, the 1850s, and 1860s. That made me go long term and think about individuals as impact, and not just the ones who were owned directly. So Arthur, because of that student work, is why at the mound, Arthur is included, because students looked at him and saw where he was and like, no, he's in the dorm all the time. It reminded me like, oh, wait, they picked up on this. I need to make sure his story and he as an individual connected through the mound can be used to illuminate it. And then the other was women, enslaved women on campus. And to especially my students of color, but also my women in community, but also in homeschool parents, they're like, we know women are here. We know through the published histories about Luna and what happens to her. But are there other women? Are there children here? Can you? And I'm like, yes, there are. But they're like, can you bring them in? Because we want to hear those voices too. So it's not seen as only men being affected. And it's because of students and especially community partners who wanted to hear that story. I made sure to tell the story of the women in front of the President's Mansion, talking about them a lot more than what I was. And that is because this is a response. This is a call and response. It's a give and take. And while I know this, I have to think about it's not academic publishing world. It is community partnership and tour participants. And so when they ask for materials and ask for questions, and then too, at the end of every tour, they're always asking where to go next, what books to read, what archival collections to read. So I'm like, if they're asking for this, they want to do more. And then, okay, let me make sure that they're here. But yeah, students and community partners have helped shape the addition of names, and also to what materials go online and what gets in the classroom beyond just the tour.
I think it's so important to have that collaboration, and I know it's like you said, it's a give and take. But I know it feeds a part of your soul that few other things do when you have that partnership with your students and then with the community. Let's ask a question now from Deborah Gert, one of our colleagues from Mobile. She says, "Thanks for the excellent presentation. Curious if you're aware of any leads on the Mobile relations of the drummers that an archivist in Mobile, meaning herself, might try to find." Fascinating history.
Honestly, I have a heart for Mobile. I love Mobile because my first book was on Mobile and Richmond. So for me, I was trying hard, and I'm still trying because I want to know what those connections are. So I'm gonna start really seriously post the completion of my second book project to track down those leads. So I'm gonna start with the Watsons themselves, go through the census records, and see if I can go that way. But also to thinking about if I can find who's their family members that they're visiting and what happened to the families, because I believe they stayed in Mobile. So I'm gonna do that and see if I can build those connections. I'm gonna start off with the census records. I haven't had time to, but I want to find out because of my connections with Mobile and my research and what happened. If I can't find the drummers, can I find what happened to their families in that part of it? And this is where that intellectual curiosity comes into play and what keeps me going. I'm like, okay, I just don't know it yet, but that doesn't mean it's not knowable. So I'm going to start with the Watsons themselves and go that way.
Well, as you know, archivists love a challenge. So
yes, we do.
Happy to help in any way possible. I want to ask a question, a related question of sorts from Isaac Prentice now. This is a question that comes to us from YouTube. Do you know if David Neal had relatives in the Tuscaloosa community? He says he has Neal relatives in Northport.
Yeah, so all right, this is the problem with doing this research from slavery to after slavery. I know I've seen the Neal family name, especially in the 1867 Reconstruction, the voter registration books, and seeing that, and I see sometimes in their records and what is there. I have not traced out a lot of the history, but for me, when I do the afterlives of slavery, I look at Northport because of the Black community in terms of politics and the survivors. So, like Claiborne Garland, Cornelius Garland, those early Republican individuals who are teaching schools. They own schools, they're operating schools, they're doing a lot of work. They are in community with Northport. So when you see them in connection, they are connected back and forth. So when they're appearing on the blacklist, you see names. So as I move forward to the third one, I have the name, so I'm gonna look see if I can get any concrete. So that I look at Tuscaloosa County more broadly.
Right.
And not just the town itself, because the Black community are traveling throughout the county into the community itself and through the churches, the schools, the Masons, a large Mason population, and others. There's a lot of community that expands throughout the county. So while I don't have any specific on that family, I know there's connections between Jeremiah Barnes and Northport and also others there.
Okay. Pamela has another question on tours that we wanted to address. She said, can you talk about the training and use of African American students to conduct the tour of the BFSA ambassadors specifically?
Yeah, so this is one of the things, and thanks, Pam, because I know her. One of the things that I've done before was through not so much the BFSA initially, but was through the Guardhouse for their History Day. Was develop a modified tour that could be done by students during that day. And 2 years ago, Andre Denham and other BFSA members who are head of the BFSA scholars asked if they would be able to do the tour during Black History Month on Saturdays, because weekends for me is prime time. I do a lot of work. I'm unable to do tours. So using that same training and material there for the BFSA scholars to get. But one of the challenges in doing that tour, especially when I'm on leave now, if it wasn't for the BFSA scholars, there will be no tours whatsoever this whole academic year, because I'm gone for the physical year. And I had to turn down requests. So one of the things moving forward, specifically not undergrads, but grad students within gender and race studies, had that part of their GTA-ship, where we can work on together, not just the tours and having set times that people can sign up, but to build out the digital humanities component. And when that process of really thinking about expansion, because being one person hurts, I can't do everything. So how to bring students in and learning those skills of public history, public engagement, and on a campus where they're going to get their degrees from. This is personal. This is a lot more different for them, and having them help is where I'll be moving more towards in the future. And I will have less time doing the tours themselves, but really bring this into a history education and public history and having that. So it'll be more training, not so much of the material, but how do you deal with the emotional aspect of this history from participants who never encountered history of slavery. How to prepare them for the questions. I think that is where the next step is really to engage with. But I am grateful for the Black faculty and staff scholars, because they are doing the tours when I am not here. And they are the only group that I've allowed beyond just that, because I know they would do a good job.
Sure. I want to ask you another question too, sort of open-ended question. Are there other ways that you think the university should apply its resources, and I mean both physical and fiduciary resources, towards this ongoing goal of greater awareness and equity?
Yes, and this is something I think about more often. One of the things is this is an alternate campus tour.
Right.
I would like it to be part of the main tour. And my work, Dr. Meredith Bagley, who's done one on authoring Lucy Foster, can we incorporate this history and not segregate it out? So revising the whole campus tour and bringing that in and infrastructure and expand. But also, too, having the resources to support faculty doing this work, and especially the digital humanities side, having the time, the student allocations, and that work to do the work that's coming. Because honestly, the digitization part, that's a multi-year
Sure.
process. And so having institutional will and support to do that, to apply for grants and others. But one of the things that I hope that the university can do is to recognize and own its past, not as something that is awful and bad and we just forget it, but to really say, as someone who does not like progress narratives, and I don't, this is a progress narrative. How I would not be at the
Yeah.
University of Alabama if not for everything that had came before it, that I worked with the civil rights movement, 56, 63, like I wouldn't be here. So if you're going to talk about growth, you're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, you also need to talk about that. Like, hey, yes, we went here, but we're no longer our past. This is our present and our future. And I think that's a way, if we embrace that, rather than the fear that we might lose people, we might not get everyone's support, and therefore will not be fully committed. And then also reckoning with all building names, future building names. What are the courses? What are the support? Can we get scholarships for legacy students to expand legacy to include the Candace Barnes? That I think
Right.
would be more way, and I think it's a multidisciplinary, multifaceted role, but I think the university is capable of doing it. And it's just thinking about and planning that and the framework for that allows for future growth. So you might not have all the answers now, but if you're aiming for growth and continuing, you can start doing your steps, your initial goals, your long-term goals, and the measures that you'll get to it.
That's great. The sort of shades there of the James Baldwin quote from The Fire Next Time that you have on your website.
Mhm.
Read that for our viewers if they haven't seen
Oh,
it already.
oh my gosh, I don't have
Well,
enough
no,
on.
I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. This is his quote about a usable past.
Yeah, so this quote, if I could, I'm going to pull it up here. Sorry.
That's all right.
This is a quote that I have on a print in my office. So when I leave my office, I see two pieces of artwork. One of this has this quote by James Baldwin with the names of the enslaved people written in between. To accept one's past, one's history, is not the same thing as drowning in it. It is learning how to use it. An invented past can never be used. It cracks and crumbles under the pressures of life like clay in a season of drought. And Baldwin, in that quote in particular, and there's another quote that I have, has really helped me frame as I move forward and think about it and how to own this past. Because I will say it is hard to talk about slavery. As a scholar, it is hard to talk about slavery. It's even harder to talk about slavery when it's your employer and you're talking about the site of slavery at your site of employment and this legacy. But seeing that Baldwin quote, learning the names, learning the history, finding the legacies, I finally recognized my own positionality at the school. I am part of that legacy, the Black faculty who are there, the current student population. And so for me, I had to accept this past as well. I had to learn to deal with this past and how to, if I'm dealing with this and being upfront with my students, I'm like, no, this is not easy. But we can do this together and move forward because we're committed to this diverse, equitable institution. And Baldwin's words has become my mantra in many ways. And as I enter and out of my office in now the renamed Manley Hall, so I'm in offices in Manley Hall, I see this. And I also see another marker, that a piece of art that I made that has some of the digitized slave receipts in a collage. And it says, say their names. So between these, I look, I'm like, yep, I'm saying their names, I'm learning their names, but I also see James Baldwin. And that the students and the changes that have happened since 2015 is what keeps me going and why I'm committed to doing this work and to push through, because slavery is hard to deal with.
Well, Dr. Green, on behalf of everyone watching today and a lot of people, the whole state over, we thank you for this work, this good and necessary and courageous work that you continue to do in Tuscaloosa. We're looking forward to having you back in Alabama at the end of the academic year. I want to remind everyone that in the comments section, there is a link to our survey. We would appreciate you taking just a moment to fill out the survey for us and remind you that we're in our 31st year of Food for Thought, and this series this year is brought to you by the Alabama Humanities Alliance and the Friends of the Alabama Archives. We look forward to seeing you on March 18th for the next edition of Food for Thought. Dr. Green, thank you again, and thank you everyone for watching.